Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Curious John. Actually, the first podcast of 2023. As I think through the future of this podcast, as I often do, I probably do more than I should be. I often like to think through, like, what does the next 6 months look like? What does the next year look like? And just the evolution of the podcast as a whole, right? In the beginning, it was very interview-like, which the goal is to start implementing those little by little as I get them. But also, there's always been a big focus on personal development. There's always been a big focus on some of the lessons I've learned over the years. And it's really interesting because, there comes a point where I can't eloquently teach you or talk to you about the things I've experienced and taking a lesson out of that. There'll be a point where I've tapped the well. I don't think I'm there yet, but I was just thinking about the frequency of the podcast and the things that eventually the podcast will have to evolve into. But because this is a lot of times like a way for me to vocalize kind of different concepts, I was thinking about, like, what does 23 look like for the podcast? Not the future of the podcast, not ultimately the end goal or what the ultimate finalizing version of this is. And I often think about 23 and I just start thinking, like, my mind just goes directly to goal planning, right? Because that's where we are. We are literally in the turn of the page. You're starting a new book. And while I don't want to keep this podcast focused on goals, I was thinking about, like, people always make goals. Why? Because we want change. Why? Because you're trying to improve something. You're trying to get out of a bad situation, whatever the situation is. And as I get older, I've come to realize a lot of things about myself, especially as I get older and the ego goes away and, some of the tall tale signs of testosterone kind of change from what I was in my early 20s when I was just pig-headed and borderline dickish. And one of the things I realize about myself as I get older is, like, I have far more empathy than I ever thought I had. I mean, I definitely can be quote-unquote dickish, but I think there's a far more empathy there than I sometimes have given myself credit for in the past. And while the empathy is important in my mind, I think empathy is very important because it extends an olive branch of understanding to other people. I also think that there's a hard-nosed, tough motherfucker that lives inside of me that fights often with that empathy creature. If there were two different creatures in my head, one's the empathy and one is like this tough dude who's like, suck it up, buttercup. And those two are always at odds with each other because one of them is always trying to be understanding and trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. Always trying to let people have a certain level of understanding because I don't know their plight. I don't know their struggles. I don't know their lives. I don't know the lack of choices or lack of education on choices. I always try to be as understanding as I can, especially because, as I've mentioned many a times on this podcast, I'm not one who will get to live every single life out there or more than one, right? Multiple lives. I won't get that. I won't get to see everybody's perspective on things. And that theory about you growing up with the same genetics and the same action or the same nature nurture as like somebody like Hitler, to take an extreme, would mean that you very likely would also turn into that person, right? We're all blank slates in the beginning to a certain degree. And I think some people feel that when they have children. When they have children, they start seeing people, some people start seeing people differently, and they start understanding that everybody, even that quote-unquote dickish person that was a baby at some point, and something happened along the way to make them become that thing that they are now that you're not very happy with. The other side of the coin for me, apart from the empathy, this more dickish side of me thinks about this new year and thinks about change and progression and evolving. Some of you guys will see the logo evolution on my social media. And I think about evolving and I think about improving and taking yourself to a better version of yourself or a better place from where you are, or just growing as a human being. And some of that does not go without struggle. Some of that does not happen without purposeful planning towards that change. And some of that does not happen without, let's face it, difficulty and strife. we want to improve. We want to get better. We want to do things, but we often don't want them bad enough to take action. And I think through 2023, and a lot of my goals are very action oriented. None of them happen out of nowhere. None of them are going to just happen if I do nothing. Most of my goals are always action oriented, because then that puts the burden on me. That puts me in that corner that I often paint myself with projects. I put myself in a corner of something where it's far above my skill level, and I say, well, we're going to figure this out, or you're going to be completely disappointed in yourself when you get this product and it looks terrible, right? And then you'll end up having to redo it because it bothers you that much. I tend to corner myself a lot because that pressure is what makes diamonds, right? So back to the point, I look back at 2023 and I like to think through and like, what am I going to do here? What am I going to do there? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And I often think through like other people who want change, but don't want it bad enough. And these same people are always the ones that are complaining of where they are in life or how they can't get out of things. In 2022, I put out 30 plus episodes. And in those 32 episodes, give or take, I gave you guys, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I gave you guys fucking gold. And what I mean by that is those episodes that I call like those diamonds or the nuggets, whatever I call them throughout the podcast, because I didn't do a great job of like naming them with like something catchy. Those podcasts that are very, very, very crucial for my fundamental approach to life, right? Some of those that are to me incredibly useful tools for my day-to-day are things that I've just kind of blurted out there, right? Let's look at a couple. More. Venom. Oh, I should give you guys episodes. More, number 40. Venom, 37. Perspective, 29. Choice, 24. More, 23. The Owner, 20. Work, 19. Right? Why, 14. Challenges, 12. I mean, all of these are incredibly useful tools that you can implement yourself to make change within yourself. And all of these things are things that if you could implement them, and I just read you a good half a dozen podcasts. That's a lot to implement and a lot to do. But if you could do it, it would help you change the way you approach things, because it's been tremendously helpful for me in all to be able to come to those realizations and implement them on a regular basis. It's been incredibly useful for me, because I'm not the same kid I was when I was 22. That kid would have failed tremendously in many, many respects. Broken, probably. What I'm trying to essentially say in this podcast is, while we're in a new year, and while a lot of you likely want change and want to improve on things, my question to you is, are you going to? And that's a serious question to ask yourself. Are you going to make the changes that you're looking to make in your life? Do you want them bad enough to make changes? Everybody wants to be super rich or successful or famous or whatever. Everybody wants that. But are you willing to put in the level of work that is required? You know, people like to bag on guys like Elon and some of these guys like Bezos, but these are the guys that were sleeping in their desks at night. They weren't going home to a family cooked meal. They weren't going home to like kids that loved them. Maybe they were. But a lot of times there's stories about them sleeping in their desk floor so they can get back up and work in the next day. Can you say that you're doing that in the endeavors that you're looking to be successful in? That includes maybe your physical fitness. That includes your financial health. That includes your mental health. That includes your physical health. Whatever the freaking thing is, right? Are you doing what you should be doing? And if you're not, are you prepared to eat that shit sandwich when you run out of time. Whether that's your end goal by the end of the year, whether that's your life. Are you prepared at the end of your life to look back at that life and take ownership of the things you didn't do to get yourself out of the holes you dug yourself into? This is the beginning of the year, of a whole new year. It is time for you to take some ownership. It's time for you to do more. It's time to accept the challenges that you need to accept to become the best version of yourself that you can be. That doesn't happen without work, without sometimes tears and blood. Are you prepared for that? And once again, are you prepared at the end of your life? Or for those of you that are parents, are you prepared for your children to see you make those same mistakes? Are you willing to make those mistakes so often that they potentially continue to make your mistakes for you? Or for those of you without children, are you prepared at the end of your life to truly look back at it and swallow your pride and realize that you made a tremendous number of mistakes by not accepting certain challenges, by taking the easiest road possible for you? My empathetic side wants to say, go ahead and travel your path to get to your end goal. But the other side of me, what I'm now calling the dickish side, basically saying talk is cheap and actions speak. So which one of those two are you going to be doing this year? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the podcast. 2023 is off to a good start so far, a day in. But I think ultimately the goal is to try to continue to have this podcast be a good, maybe, I'm going to butcher this, but a contemplation point, right? Something that just gets your mind thinking and gets you moving. And as I continue to introduce interviews, I'll still continue to put out content. And that's the goal, at least for 23. I do have some episode goals. I do have some interviews I'm trying to get it lined up. And I do have some more specific gems. God, I just use another one. I use diamonds. I use gems. I use nuggets. Anyways, I do have a few more to drop, but I'm waiting for specific time frames. So I hope you had a wonderful New Year's. And we'll talk next time.